a starting point with all of this. The Supreme Court has already ruled on this exact issue.
Absolutely. This is nearly 50 years old.
Yes. There's
Yeah.
long-standing precedent on this exact issue. Like, everyone who's gone to law school, literally everyone who's gone to law school knows that you cannot post the 10 Commandments in school. Like, my dad is a lawyer in Kentucky. And when this,
so he has the case. Don't be Graham if your dad knows.
He wasn't, I mean, yeah, he wasn't involved in that. He's just, again, just like a human who's a lawyer. And as soon as he heard about, y'all's litigation, he was like, what is going on down there, Ellie? They passed a law like requiring the 10 Commandments like in schools. Like, that's obviously decided. I was like, I know. And they're obviously trying to get it re-decided. But like, I just think that's really important for people to know that, like, notwithstanding, like any, whatever fucking James Madison said, whatever fucking Kennedy said, like, there is like direct precedent that is very old and very settled. And you only have to have like gone to law school to know that.
There's a reason for most people, they haven't been seeing the 10 Commandments in schools. And that's largely because it's prohibited.
Welcome to Seriously, the podcast that dives into the baffling.
We can't send them to a prison where there's animals, where there's livestock.
The ridiculous.
Like omelets better than sex.
And downright unbelievable political climate in red states like Louisiana.
So we can't go there. There are no vegan jails.
Seriously.
Welcome to Seriously. We're your hosts. I'm Michelle.
And I'm Ellie.
Today, we have a great guest, Nora Ahmed. Nora is the legal director at ACLU of Louisiana, and she's made a career out of fighting for civil rights, civil liberties in wrongful conviction cases. She's works on immigration. She's done special needs class action. She's done fair housing cases, jack of all trades. And we're so excited to have you on the podcast, Nora. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. That's like a good description of the ACLU, I feel like jack of all trades, like civil rights litigation. You got to be an expert in all things.
And then we'll say master of none, but I like to say master of all things as well.
I'm also a general litigator, so I understand that. Yeah.
So we invited you on today to talk specifically about the 10 Commandments. But before we get into that, we like to share with each other what has made us think seriously recently.
We've invited you on to talk about the 10 Commandments litigation, not about the 10 Commandments.
Well, I was sort of teasing, but okay.
Per se.
Not to proselytize.
But yes. In case our listeners were confused and thought that they had tuned into the wrong podcast, they have not. We're talking about, the Louisiana's law that is requiring schools to post the 10 Commandments and your litigation fighting that. But you can also just talk about the 10 Commandments if you want. That's fair. That's fine too.
It'll probably factor in.
Yeah.
All right. Well, before we talk
Michelle,
about any of that, who wants to share what's made you think seriously recently?
I don't want to go first this week because I literally have consumed zero news, which has been nice. But So, yeah.
Well, I will start us off then. So seriously, I mean, there's always so many to choose from these days, but mine this week is Kash Patel again. So the director of the FBI doesn't know who Dylann Roof is. So he was at the House Judiciary Committee this week, and he was being questioned by one of the Democratic representatives from Los Angeles. I think her name is Sydney Comlager Dove. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. So she asked Patel about whether he disagreed with the characterization that violent extremists were motivated by right-wing views. And then she specifically names Dylann Roof, who, if our listeners don't know, killed 9 Black congregants at a church in 2015.
Thank you for your response to my colleague from New York who asked you earlier about violent extremism. And you said that there is violent extreme ideology on both sides. And I think you actually alluded to that same statement yesterday in the Senate. So I too have some questions I'd like to ask you. These are not gotcha questions, and just deny, please, what you deem to be false. So Dylan Roof, who followed white supremacist propaganda, murdered 9 Black parishioners in Charleston in 2015. Do you deny this?
I'm sorry. Dylan Ruth?
Roof?
Can you give me some more information?
You're head of the FBI. You probably know this. If you don't know, that's fine.
If you can give me a reminder, I've got a lot in front of me.
It was national news.
This is really, he's the director of the FBI. No clue who this white supremacist murderer is. I mean, this is just 10 years ago.
Terrorism's really not a big part, though, of the FBI's repertoire, so that seems fine. For any of our listeners who don't know what I mean, yeah, like that's like one of the big things that the FBI in our country is supposed to be doing, you know, both in terms of domestic and foreign terrorism, but really mainly they're our domestic law enforcement agency. So terrorism is one of like their sort of like core areas of practice. So yeah, you know, but that was you know, that was against Black people, and it was, you know, by somebody on the right. So he doesn't need to know about that.
Yeah. Well, this was another hearing that just went off the rails just completely. It might have been even more insane, I think, than the RFK hearings have been, but I don't know. Nora, do you have one that you wanted to share?
I would say that this week I went to Camp 57 at Angola, our brand new immigration detention facility on former plantation, largest maximum security prison in the United States. So,
wow.
As I say, that is a new high for Louisiana, because that brings us to 10 immigration detention centers, just shy of Texas's 11, making us number 2 in the entire country for detained immigrants, and a new low for what I often think of as big lie that's constantly promoted, that immigration detention can be used as a form of criminal punishment. And I don't think that anyone can fully understand that that's not allowed when you start putting immigrants who have already served their time for crimes, frequently years back, once again onto a maximum security prison ground. And somehow you say, we believe in the United States Constitution. We believe in the double jeopardy clause, meaning that you're not allowed to be twice punished for the same crime. And yet we're doing that to immigrants.
It's unbelievable.
Putting them in a jail inside of Angola. But we're saying, no, that's not double punishment. That's something different. That's civil punishment, which is not criminal punishment, which I don't think any of us can believe, but just made me think of our new low.
Well, first of all, I guess, are they only even detaining people there who actually were convicted of a crime? Or are they also detaining people who just, you know, the crime is maybe they're here illegally?
So generally speaking, right now, they are claiming, and it seems to be corroborated, that the individuals who are there have been convicted or pled guilty to crimes in other scenarios, in other situations, in other states. However, immigration detention is federal, so anyone can be put in Angola. So even though the decision now is to put people who on their roster, it says that they pled guilty or were convicted of a crime, that is not a requirement necessarily to be placed there, even though they say it, because immigration detention centers frequently change the population of who's there. So one day you could have a detention center, for example, Richwood up north, it was all women, and now there are men there as well. So everything is fungible and can change, but that's also what's so deeply problematic about putting an immigration detention center on the grounds of Angola, because it suggests a form of criminality that can't apply to anybody, right? It can't apply to anybody who's already served their time, but it also brings into the mind of the American people that immigrants are somehow illegal because they're undocumented. And I have a problem with the term illegal immigrant, and I have a problem with the term undocumented, because the reason people are being put behind bars, it's because they're documented, because we know where they are. And frequently they're going through a legal process. It's one that the government doesn't like, but people are legally allowed to come to this country, as they did to Ellis Island, and say, hey, I'm seeking refuge and safety from harms that are being perpetrated against me by my home country. That is not illegal. That's the basis on which our country was largely founded, that you can come here and find a home. So it's difficult for me, because there's a narrative out there that's false. There's a big lie out there about criminal illegal immigrants, and all of those words are largely wrong, other than maybe immigrant.
Yeah.
There's a lot, of course, to say about that. But like, as Michelle knows, and like some of our listeners know, way back in the day, then I did some political asylum work for, as you said, people trying to come to the country who either were detained at the border or, were going through the process in other ways. And the first client I had was detained at the border. And this was at Wackenhut, like up in New Jersey, which is a private prison.
Predecessor to Geo Group that trades on the New York Stock Exchange right now.
Yeah, that's right. But it was a standalone, like it wasn't part of like Angola, like you're saying, like it wasn't like extra stigmatizing, but it was like, I mean, visiting him there, it was very, very difficult. That, pre-hearing detention was really like very, very intense. But as I've also said on this podcast, like, I don't think that people understand, and this is again conflating it, is that like immigration proceedings are civil. They are civil proceedings. And one of the
100%.
big problems with that is that you're not entitled to a lawyer.
There you go.
So you can get sent to Angola.
But we've got the big, beautiful bill. So the money should go to giving everyone a lawyer. There's no excuse now. Where can the money come from? It can come from that big, beautiful bill. There's another $20 billion to give every single person an attorney, and it won't even get close to $1 billion. There's another 19 billion left.
Well, I'm sure that that's what they're going to earmark it for, Nora.
Absolutely. I'm convinced that this was all about due process.
What were the conditions like?
I mean, I've been to all the detention centers in Louisiana, so they largely appear similar, but when you go to visit clients, it's very different than when you go on a stakeholder tour. But for right now, it still looks as though things are being unpacked. There's a lot of styrofoam, a lot of new hires. This is really a brand new facility. Well, not a new facility writ large, but it is new in this iteration of its lifestyle as a LaSalle Corporation Immigration Detention Center. So there was a lot of unboxing, there was styrofoam, there were a number of employees, right? Just learning what their new roles were going to be. Doesn't seem as though there's a person in every role. So you have compliance people who are trying to make sure that attorneys are getting in to see clients, et cetera. So, it looked very similar to me, and someone asked, if you've ever been to Richwood or Jackson, also immigration detention centers, also run by LaSalle, very similar vibe, a little bit different, but we were only in one spot where we met with the clients. There's also a central area. ICE offices are around. They have some benches somewhere. That's likely where they're going to be shown a video when they come there about the ostensible rights that they have. So, but, it's Angola, and it's, I think it's the specter, it's the lore, it's the press conference that was held there. It's the suggestion that you're not welcome in this country. And if you are, we will criminalize you and we will put you behind bars. And it's a warning to everybody else that the same fate can befall them. And it's scary who we're seeing in detention, because I also don't think people understand that many of their friends, families, and neighbors were once granted protection from the Convention Against Torture, even though they couldn't go back home. Those are the people that we're seeing. We're seeing people who are supposed to be protected by the Convention Against Torture from going back home But right now, as a country, we're trying to displace them to a third country that they've never been to. And we're holding them beyond that presumptive 6 months that the United States has to work to remove you. So you have a lot of very challenging situations and feelings that people have in confusion because they have lives and families and spouses all in the country that they've just been ripped apart from for in this particular case, convictions that they served time for, usually minimal time, a number of people suspended sentences. So they weren't actually ever imprisoned for that particular crime. But now they're being imprisoned 20 years later. So it's very wild to have these conversations and to meet with people because there's an enormous amount of confusion.
I'm sure. I mean, right, because none of it makes sense. And I think there was a press conference when they rolled out this. Yeah, that was very like alligator Alcatraz-ish.
Yeah.
That was like, we're sending these people to Angola because like we don't want people coming here. Like we want people to know that like they're gonna go to Angola. Like it was like, they're not even pretending anymore. Like that the cruelty is not supposed to be disproportionate punishment and or deterrent. So yeah. And I love it too, like you're saying that like they haven't fucking finished unpacking the goddamn boxes, and they haven't like finished, of course, like training anyone, on compliance, but like we gotta start packing people in there, man. Like why wait? Why wait until just the basics of the place being ready? Got to do it now.
And it should really be never, but it's really just this.
Yes, that's right.
The dangerous aspect, right, is that we're making civil immigration detention synonymous with criminal punishment. And the fact that that day has come in America where we can look at that with a straight face and not be deeply concerned that it means that any one of us can end up behind bars at a maximum security prison for no reason. That's what's so scary, that it's the beginning of a trend of wrongfully incarcerating people time and time again. Because when we sign off on this, we're signing off on so much more. And that's what's so scary about so much of what we're seeing, that everyone somehow thinks that it's going to stay away, or that what we're doing to immigrants, it's about immigrants. I always say it has nothing to do with immigrants. It has to do with us, right? It has to do with who is allowed to be in America. What are you allowed to believe? What are you actually allowed to talk about? And it's necessary that the country indoctrinate you, which sort of gets us to the 10 Commandments and where we are, right? We're in a new era of changing the foundation of this country and the Constitution and what it means to be an American and what it means to be free from so many impediments that were the reason this very country was founded. And we are rolling back that clock and trying to actually say you are not free from all of those impediments. We will impose those impediments on you and on your life, and ultimately change the way in which you not only engage with your family, but also with the government and the world. And that's an extraordinarily scary place to be.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, and we'll get into this, but like, the picking and choosing that our Supreme Court and, people bringing these cases and like sort of all of our lawmakers on the Republican side are doing at this point in terms of like what counts as government overreach and what doesn't, just like everything is just like flipped on its head. And that's been true in some ways for a long time, like including with abortion, as we all know, like they were always all in with that kind of government overreach. But, it's just that it's not even a double standard, I don't think, or like hypocrisy. It's just like they don't care anymore about trying to like square the square. They're like, the stuff that we want to do is not overreach, and the stuff that other people think is important, we don't care. Yeah.
Or if they do the exact same thing that we do.
Yes.
If they do the exact same thing, we can lock them up for it. Right. Exactly.
So my seriously is just going to be that. So yeah, as I said, so I'm at a conference right now. I was like lucky to be able to go visit a good friend before this conference. So I've been out of town and not consuming any media, which has been good. My seriously is just, why am I always so tired? Like, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. There's just like never a time that I'm not so fucking tired. Which, I mean, our conversation now is like, I mean, there's there's plenty of answers to that, but yeah, like that's a seriously that I ask myself.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's get into the Moses of it all. So, so Louisiana passed this 10 Commandments law in 2024. So, for anybody who has not been following this, Nora, what exactly does the law require schools to do, and what's the problem? Why are you suing?
So the law says that a very particular version of the 10 Commandments, and that's really important because this isn't just, Christian, anti-Christian. That's not actually what this is about at all, right? That a very particular version of the 10 Commandments, the Protestant version of the 10 Commandments, and that is outlined in the statute, that has to be displayed as a central focus of a poster that is 11 by 14 inches. So if you think of an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, 11 by 14 is bigger than that. So we're talking about a poster that has the 10 Commandments displayed as the central focus alongside some form of a context statement. And that's not specified. And the size of that context statement, that's not necessarily important. And it needs to be in every Louisiana public school classroom. So you can imagine that parents of elementary school students, you can imagine that parents of middle school, high school students, that this can become deeply concerning just because school, let's just be honest, and I think kids will agree, it's a coercive atmosphere. You're locked inside of a classroom and you are instructed in particular ways, and you have 4 walls, and you look around at those 4 walls. And we run into problems here because we're not talking about this particular version of the 10 Commandments, which let's be real, and we have some of our plaintiffs here. This is not okay when you're talking about different sects of Christianity. There is not agreement among different sects of Christianity, including Catholics, on which 10 Commandments is the version of the 10 Commandments to use. So it's very important to understand that it's not just Jewish parents that came forward. It's not just Catholic parents that came forward. You also have people who are non-religious. You also have people who are atheist. You also have Unitarian Universalists who came forward and said, as a parent, I want to make sure that I educate my child in the way about religion that I think is appropriate. And this doesn't pass muster because I don't know why in biology class, my kid has to stare at this 10 Commandments, and then in math class, and then in, social studies, where, let's just be real about Louisiana's curriculum, the 10 Commandments isn't mentioned in the standards of the curriculum for social studies and world history. So if it's that educationally important, you'd think that it would appear there at least once, but it doesn't. And that's where we're getting to a conversation that this is about imposing religion and doing something that our Constitution forbids. There are 2 things that we know that the Constitution says that the country's not supposed to do. It's not supposed to establish religion, and it's also not supposed to impede the free exercise of religion. So you should be able to practice whatever religion or whatever lack of religion you want to practice or not practice, and you do not have to abide by any form of religion that the country tells you is required to follow. This country was founded on that. And what's wild when you think about what Louisiana did when they put it forward with a false statement by James Madison. They said, well, James Madison said this. And there is no basis for this. All of the historians will tell you this statement about God and Madison can be found nowhere. It is totally false.
Wait, I want to follow up about that. So what do you mean? So was this in the debate about the bill, or this is in like the preamble?
This is the conversation about why, it makes sense for us to do this, right? Because after Kennedy, right, so in 2022, the United States Supreme Court heard the case about the football coach who was praying on the field. And then the United States Supreme Court issued a decision ultimately saying that what he was doing was not, contrary to the dictates of the Constitution as it relates to what's happening in public schools. But they did that under a very different understanding of the First Amendment and his rights. And it was not a watershed in a change in the way that we view the Constitution and the prohibition against enforcing religion on people. So what Kennedy did a little bit differently, though, is it said, well, let's look at the history of prayer, etc. Let's go back to the founding fathers and what was happening at the time of the Constitution. And that is a fundamental aspect of our analysis when we look to, religion in and around schools.
House Bill 71 is precisely on target with the Supreme Court's findings in Kennedy. It historically and faithfully reflects our founding fathers' reliance on the Ten Commandments as the foundation of America's justice system, and thus is essential for proper understanding of our American history and heritage.
But the issue here is none of that is in existence. So the pulling of the Madison quote is just a way of justifying that, hey, the founding fathers really thought the Ten Commandments were super important, even though in the index of the Federalist Papers, the word Ten Commandments, Scripture, Bible, it doesn't appear anywhere. And let's be real, this is one of the first amendments, right?
Yes.
The First Amendment said, let's just be clear that we cannot do this, right? We have come from a place where religion was imposed and for centuries caused many problems with God kings and all this other nonsense, right? We're going to stay away from this and say, look, you can do what you want. We support that. But the country, we're not getting involved. Separation of church and state, right? This is not what we do. And we're going to be inclusive in how we do that. So this was just, an added layer of, I would say, pretext to get people comfortable with having this not be something new and basically saying that it's something old. But it's not old.
Right. So, but just also to be clear, just like a starting point with all of this, the Supreme Court has already ruled on this exact issue.
Absolutely. This is nearly 50 years old.
Yeah. There's long standing precedent on this exact issue. Like everyone who's gone to law school, literally everyone who's gone to law school knows that you cannot post the Ten Commandments in school. Like my dad is a lawyer in Kentucky. And when this,
so he has the case. Don't be Graham if your dad knows.
Well, he wasn't, he wasn't involved in that. He's just, again, just like a human who's a lawyer. And as soon as he heard about, y'all's litigation, he was like, what is going on down there, Ellie? They passed a law, like, requiring the Ten Commandments, like, in schools. Like, that's obviously decided. I was like, I know. And they're obviously trying to get it re-decided. But like, I just think that's really important for people to know that, like, notwithstanding, whatever fucking James Madison said, whatever fucking Kennedy said, like there is like direct precedent that is very old and very settled. And you only have to have like gone to law school to know that.
There's a reason for most people, they haven't been seeing the Ten Commandments in schools. And that's largely because it's prohibited. And then, but also there's a separate argument, even aside the fact that it's established precedent. The only other place the state has to go is history. And they don't have that either, right? So they're out on both fronts. Even if they're trying to change Stone v. Graham and saying, we want a new legal test, it's not really going to work because they also don't get there. And that's why even the Fifth Circuit said, guess what? No.
Yeah.
What do you think the
Yeah.
Supreme Court's going to do, though?
Well,
yeah.
I mean,
Maybe we shouldn't jump to that so quick, but yeah.
yeah, let's not jump to that so quick.
Okay.
I mean, I do want to kind of dig in because it seemed to me that like, I remember watching the hearings and like listening to all the debate when this bill was going through in 2024. And all of the history stuff to me was just like, oh, they are very specifically putting all of this in the record strategically so that they can try to like the Supreme Court is all about this history and tradition crap, right? Of course, it's a very like whitewashed, whatever Alito and Thomas think is history and tradition, but it seemed very intentional that they were trying to make this jives with history and tradition specifically for this Supreme Court.
But it doesn't jive for American public schools, right? Because when the Constitution was born, we didn't really have American public education in the way that we do now. So what they're trying to do, you know, they tethered together, you know, 3 textbooks that they found, like, oh, look, we found 3 textbooks that mention the 10 Commandments. That must mean that this was happening everywhere around the country. No basis for that. That would be like if I walked around this neighborhood and I found 3 books and I said, this is the foundation of what's going on in everyone's home. That's ridiculous.
Or even in this neighborhood. I mean,
yeah, there's no basis for that. All the historians have said that. So I think the important part about it is, yes, there is precedent, and that's very that's critically important here, but also for everyone who's trying to say, but there's a new test out there, you know, and we don't need to go into the legal test, but the Supreme Court's going to look at it differently. There's nothing to look at differently because the history and tradition aspect of that, it's not there. Right. And they had to rely on fake news to even try to convince you that there was a there, but there is no there. That's why there was a hearing. Historians were at the hearing. It's like, I'm going to tell you about the history of what happened. There's nothing there. So you don't have it on either side. You shouldn't be doing this. Not you. The Supreme Court already told you nearly 50 years ago, don't do this. That's bad. But even if you want to revisit it, you also can't do that because there's nothing there that allows this revisitation, and your fake news has been called out.
Well, what I thought was so funny, too, is just that, like, yeah, so on the plaintiff side, a historian comes into the court and is like, yeah, I looked and I can't see any of this history tradition. And actually, this is what's really going on. The state puts no one up. And then, of course, like is all complaining and whiny that the decision comes down granting a preliminary injunction or whatever. Yeah. And they're like, well, you only relied on this one so-called expert. It's like, well, you could have put an expert on.
Well, your job was to
dumbasses.
bring in other experts if you had them, but that proves the point. You didn't have them.
Yeah,
nobody is going to go tell you that this history exists when it doesn't. So that's why you had no one.
Except that, like, their whole plan, they know they're going to lose the whole way up. Like, again, there is very, very clear on-point precedent with this. And this is the same with what we saw with abortion. Like, just keep bringing cases that are, like, blatantly unconstitutional under anyone's current understanding of what's constitutional. For sure, the lower courts are going to go with, you know, what they're bound by, standing principle. So they know they're going to lose at these courts. I mean, you're right that in the Fifth Circuit, I mean, that was probably a little bit of a like roll the dice. I'm sure they would have liked.
They're trying to go en banc, right? Like, let's be real. They're not accepting the panel that they got. They're trying to go en banc. But
regardless of that, I mean, you know, the Fifth Circuit is certainly not a stranger to just going ahead and doing, you know, like what they would like to do. But, you know, there's clear precedent. Of course, any lower court should be ruling against the state. They don't care. They just want to get up to the Supreme Court and say, la, 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 ta-da, overturn it. But going back to the legislative, like, debates, then I remember some of which was, like, so ridiculous, was, like all kinds of talk about how, you know, like Christian values and like the values of the 10 Commandments are viewed in like our Constitution and in our general laws and in our society. Like, yeah, this whole sort of like, it's like not really like a big deal, man, to have like the actual 10 Commandments, because those values are like the driving principle. that, and then
But there's no actual 10 commandments. I think that's
yes, it's
that's
100%
a very
different.
easy, right?
Yes.
Just to say there are the 10 commandments, but then you actually get to the nitty-gritty of it, and there is a lack of agreement and some big disagreement about which 10 commandments is operative. So it's not simple.
100%. No, I mean, like the whole thing, it was, I mean, Jody, I mean, literally, she just kept repeating that like over and over. She had her talking points and she just kept going back to it and kept going back to it.
This bill just simply seeks to have a display of God's law in the classroom for children to see what he says is right and what he says is wrong.
Do we believe that imposing a Christian value that comes from the 10 Commandments on our Muslim friends or our Islamic friends or our atheist students is the proper thing to do?
I beg to differ that this is just Christian, but I have no qualms if it was.
You are familiar with the Establishment Clause in the First Amendment?
Right. And
do you know what the Establishment Clause references?
It references not to interfere with the free worship of religion.
It basically prohibits government from establishing a religion.
Correct, and that's not what I'm doing here.
Are we not basically establishing a Christian religion in our schools with this bill by presenting the 10 Commandments in a classroom?
Well, the Supreme Court acknowledged that we're going to use history to make that decision, and they ruled that 10 Commandments has a historical place in America, and it doesn't teach a religion at all. In fact, a Jewish Moses is the one who God handed it down, who handed down the 10 Commandments, as you know, were written by the hands of God.
How do you deal with this policy in a teacher who may be agnostic or atheist?
I'm not concerned with an atheist. I'm not concerned with a Muslim. I'm concerned with our children looking and seeing what God's law is.
But yeah, like it makes no sense, obviously, from a legal standpoint or really even a logical standpoint. First of all, the 10 Commandments in general are just some basic principles of what's right and wrong. So the fact that like laws are like say that like you shouldn't murder people and the 10 Commandments say that you shouldn't murder people is not like anything that's like super newsworthy and that like you can tie one to the other. So it's just like absurd. And then so I mean, in other words, displaying an explicitly religious document, requiring it to be displayed in public schools, it is completely disconnected from like, or is that general morality, like those principles also in our laws? Okay. And then I remember like with Rep. Mandy Landry, and I think with Matt Willard too, then there were some really good questions of Jody on the floor about like, well, what about, then should, can we amending the bill or like separately requiring?
I think Mandy actually did introduce an amendment to also display the golden rule, do unto others. And the Republicans voted that down.
That's right.
Mr. Speaker, members, Representative Mandy Landry offers up one-page set of amendments 2749.
I have an amendment that would add the golden rule to this statute. The 10 Commandments are very, they're all about punishment, basically, and the golden rule says you got to be nice to everyone and treat them like you want to be treated.
Okay, members, Representative Mandy Landry has offered up an amendment which Rep. Horton has objected to. All those in favor of the amendment vote yea. Those opposed to the amendment vote nay. And we have 29 yeas and 69 nays, and the amendment fails.
But there was some of this about like other religion, some sort of foundational document, which that was like, oh no, because that's not our foundational. Our society is not based on that, which is also like just whatever. But yeah, it's the golden rule is the really good one, and they voted against the golden rule.
Well, so the status of the case now is that there was a preliminary injunction in the district court, and that was upheld by the Fifth Circuit. And so what's the next step?
So now there's briefing to go en banc. So basically, the defendants want the full court of the Fifth Circuit to take up this issue. And that is a very, very difficult standard to meet, because you have to convince the Fifth Circuit that somehow the decision that they issued conflicts with their own precedent in some way, and that this is so egregious and important of an issue that they somehow must get involved.
Just again to clarify for like non-lawyers, and like this is true procedurally at like any sort of any federal appellate court, that each case is heard by a panel of 3. They issue a decision, and then if there's an argument that that decision either is not in keeping with precedent, or that it's the reason that that panel decided is because they're bound by circuit precedent, but it should be overruled, then you can ask the court for like all of those judges to sit en banc and like re-review it. So that's just like what that all means. But what is this strategy here? This is Supreme Court precedent. So why are they doing this? Why are they doing this strategically?
I mean, it's very difficult. It's difficult for me to say why are they doing this strategically. I don't know. But I also am not convinced that they're convinced that the Supreme Court will take this case. So this could be the end of the line for them. And the thought probably is there are better judges for them on this issue on the whole court of the Fifth Circuit. That maybe if they were to get before them and a full panel, they could do some important work, whether that mean actually overturning the below decision, or I think, as you know, Ellie, you and I know, part of what happens with the law is you make little divots, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so if you're able to go to an en banc court and you're able to still get a very strong dissent, that dissent can effectively create a new pathway forward for anyone else in the Fifth Circuit who might want to design their case in a way that they've now heard all of the judges on the Fifth Circuit speak, and they were given a roadmap ultimately, because that's what judges do. For those of us who work with the law every day, you know, we understand that. You go to legal decisions and frequently judges will say, hey, it didn't work out here, but hint, hint, next time you should really try this because these cases would let me get there for you. So go back to the drawing board.
We've talked about that. Like Thomas loves to do that. That's why he's always writing dissents, because he's like, no, this is how you should bring this case next time.
Well, I mean, Dobbs was super scary, right?
That actually makes a lot of sense. Like the Fifth Circuit, for people who don't know, is like widely considered the most conservative court of appeals in the country. There's plenty of like potentially favorable outcomes. Maybe the Fifth Circuit upholds the law, and then at least in Mississippi, Texas, and Louisiana, it can go into effect, and maybe the Supreme Court just, leaves it. Also creating a circuit split, if they were to do something like that, that's great for getting this up to the Supreme Court. And then my initial thought was also, the Fifth Circuit's also sort of like the farm team and like people, who are auditioning for the Supreme Court for conservatives up there. So like just giving them, if they are going to take it, giving a little more permission up there, that there's a bunch of other conservative judges who think that there is a way to overturn this. So yeah, both of these things are favorable forums. So that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you're dubious about your shot at SCOTUS, and I think we all know that it is not necessarily a given, particularly with Stone and particularly with the recent decision in Kennedy and then Mahmoud, which just came out. It's not a given that they're going to take another free exercise or establishment clause case at this point in time. So not knowing if that's even a possibility, trying to figure out what the playing field is at the Fifth Circuit, seeing if you can at least poll the judges and get a sense of where you might have some movement, assists you in, very sadly, potentially trying to draw up your next case where you try to take another crack.
I'm so sort of skeptical of the Supreme Court and what their activism at this point, that them taking up cases that they should never take, which again, to listeners who aren't lawyers, then cases that the Supreme Court should never take are where the lower court's decision is 100% in keeping with precedent, then they don't take those cases. But, that's exactly what happened in Dobbs. And there's, there's a whole project for that to happen more often. So the Supreme Court should absolutely not take this case. There's no under in any regular world, then their reaction would be the same as my dad's in Kentucky when he heard this on the news. Was like, well, that's ridiculous. This is settled law.
Yeah. I mean, Texas passed similar law, and it's
Of
making
course.
its way through the courts as well.
Well, because they're going to learn from this one, just like Nora's saying. They got
Yeah.
one on deck and probably one in the hole. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I wanted to ask about Mahmoud because I did a very deep dive on that case. I also am like, I'm an atheist, raised Jewish, have a 13-year-old kid, and just the whole religion in schools thing infuriates the fuck out of me. Like when this law passed, I was just like, I'm raising my hand, please, like put me in. I'm happy to be a plaintiff. Luckily, you all found way better plaintiffs.
But honestly, Michelle would. She would.
Just think there are so many people affected. It's so many people are affected that I don't think it's parents are parents and they love their kids and they want the right to parent and make sure their kids, have the access to a public education free from the involvement of religion in their lives in schools. So, I think, our plaintiffs are amazing, but I think there were just too many people, in fact, who wanted to be plaintiffs. And then at a certain point when we have enough, we don't necessarily need the redundancy, but,
Yeah. Well,
your feelings,
I
Michelle,
also
are many others.
Yes, I understand. But yeah, so we talked about the Mahmoud case when we did our Supreme Court sitting review from last term. So I just don't even understand how the how the state could prevail in light of that decision.
Well, I think our view is honestly that they can't, right? Because, when we look at Mahmoud on it, it's deeply problematic what is happening as a result of Mahmoud.
Mm-hmm.
But what they ultimately said is they made the free exercise clause stronger.
Mm-hmm.
They basically said that parents have, more of a say than initially many thought about having their kids opt out of access to particular content that they didn't want them to have access to. And they used religious grounds as the reason for that. So at the end of the day, while we were on all fours in the Rote case or 10 Commandments case with Stone v. Graham, we were on all fours with the history, meaning under the Establishment Clause, it was a done deal. Our secondary strong argument, but as lawyers, we have strongest and then we have strong. Right? So strongest was establishment, Stone, yay, we win. And then we had free exercise, and that was pre-Mahmoud. And then now that you have Mahmoud, honestly, the answer is that just made the free exercise clause stronger. And it means that parents definitively would have they do have this say here. And so whereas we were talking about this being on all fours with the Establishment Clause, we're also now squarely even more than we once were on all fours with free exercise, that we don't necessarily even have to get there. So I think Mahmoud made that aspect stronger.
Yeah.
I guess to Nora's point before, I mean, that should be like in a normal world, then that should be an additional nail in the coffin why the Supreme Court would not take this case up. Yeah. Assuming, of course, that the Fifth Circuit continues withstanding precedent and downcoming precedent and, enjoins the law, then the Supreme Court, this is an additional reason why they should not intervene. But yeah, I'll be very interested to see. This is one of a gajillion cases on different things that I'm like, what is it that they want to overturn? How are they going to go about we know some of the stuff that they want to overturn, or at least that like 4 of them do. And how are they going to go about, are they going to do the chipping away, or are they going to do the like full on, like, you know what, fuck it. Like, let's just be done with this. Because like the parts that always worry me is like and whether this is what they would say out loud or not, but with Mahmoud, of course, it was things that Christian parents found to be offensive and that the Supreme Court, that a majority of them finds to be offensive. They think that the 10 Commandments are, just like Jody Horton, like a part of our history and tradition and unobjectionable, unobjectionable. So like how far do we get with this kind of crap into sort of, the old school sayings of with pornography? I know it when I see it. What if this is just objectionable as opposed to it doesn't, what it's supposed to be, that it doesn't matter.
Unconstitutional,
it's
yeah.
Correct. Right. Because yes, because it's protected by the free exercise and prohibited by the establishment.
Yeah, I guess one of the questions that I have, Nora, is like, just for the ACLU kind of in general right now, like obviously the Fifth Circuit is, where constitutional rights go to die. And then the Supreme Court is doing crazy stuff as well. And how do you all kind of weigh those risks and opportunities? Obviously it's like, oh, they're trying to hang the 10 Commandments in classrooms. Like, we have to litigate this. Like, someone has to try to stop them from doing this. It's obviously very unconstitutional, but things are unconstitutional until they're not, right? How do y'all think about those kinds of decisions? Is it riskier to stop it and then get, the Supreme Court setting a terrible precedent for the rest of the country versus I'd love to hear a little bit. I'm a nerd, so
no, this
I'd
is
love
an
to hear a
important
little bit
question.
about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would say that the way I think about it is, what is the status of the law? So if the status of the law is bad, 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 horrible, couldn't be worse, I actually think that is an opportunity to litigate, because your risk of making bad law does not really exist, because it's as bad as it could possibly be. And as attorneys, we're bound to bring non-frivolous cases, but we can bring novel arguments and we can push the law. So in certain areas, we can do that very readily. So we have a policing program, right? Section 1983, Fourth Amendment, police brutality, unlawful stops and seizures. Generally speaking, in the Fifth Circuit, the precedence there is
bad.
Wow. Like really not great, horrible, bad, sad. But that doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities to litigate. There are opportunities to litigate, and we've taken on many of those opportunities, and we're actually successful at the Fifth Circuit 60% of the time. So there's that calculus, right? Is it as bad as it can possibly get? Then there is the other calculus where, and I can give you the example where we're in the immigration space right now. Typically speaking, for many years, this notion of, the Western District of Louisiana was viewed as the gatekeeper to habeas petitions for people in immigration detention, because that's where all our immigration jails are. And so the law and the precedent on habeas is not great because people didn't want to go to the first court. And it's therefore also not great when you get to the higher court. There you have to be a little bit more careful, I would say, because you're taking your first shot. And when you're taking your first shot, you want to think through a little bit more how you're going to shape, even if it's potentially a bad decision, as we were talking about earlier, you want to identify what the openings are. So you wouldn't want to throw everything into your first canister and get a decision that says you can't do any of those things. You want to go in and try and assess various different legal strategies and fact patterns. And so that particular scenario you have to think about a little bit differently. And I think then we come to the scenario that we have here, which is something is so blatantly unconstitutional. The United States Supreme Court has spoken on the issue. So you have to throw all your eggs in the basket, right? You sort of go and you hope a lot of things are going to stay the way that they once did, though I think Dobbs scared the living heebie-jeebies out of everyone. And I think it is scary. And I can tell you it's not, it is not something that wasn't thought about, right? When you think about bringing a case like this, but then you're faced with, well, the law is only as forceful as its enforcement, right? So if we have the law that says you can't do this, then we have to enforce it. So it's our job and our duty to enforce the Constitution when it is blatantly clear. So in many ways, there was no question that that would be something that we would do, but that doesn't mean that there's no fear, right? That even in working to enforce the law as it is, that it could potentially be an opportunity for that law to somehow over time, and I don't think it would be immediately, because you don't, generally speaking, now, of course, we saw what happened with Dobbs, but also, let's be real, that they've been working on that for 50 years. I mean,
I was going to say that
I
was
had
a
been
long
working.
time
Yeah,
coming.
I mean, 10 years before that, I had been working on the privileges cases in Mississippi. Like, this was all being done step by step by step. So you don't get that watershed overturning really overnight. It seems overnight to a lot of people, but that's because you had everyone fighting very hard every time someone tried to violate the Constitution and clearly established law. So that's a little bit of how one thinks about it, right? If you're largely going to get a bad decision, you have to make sure that you're on all fours when you're bringing your new arguments, but you're not necessarily doing that with the fear that you're going to make bad law because it's as bad as it gets. You then have your middle category where it's all new, which you do have to be a little bit more careful in what you're assessing and how you go about doing things. And then you have the law's a law's a law. We've got to fight for it with everything we've got. And we've got to let the people know that we're here for them. And I view it a little bit more, I don't know, Ellie, how you view your job, but I view it as there is a tractor trailer and it is going to come and bulldoze all of us. And I'm just throwing wrenches. And maybe a wrench is going to get caught. Maybe not. I'm probably going to get run over. That's a given. But eventually, if enough wrenches are thrown, the truck will stop. But that doesn't mean in my lifetime I'm not going to get bulldozed. But the throwing of the wrenches will
or
ultimately
that I'm just going to be sitting throwing wrenches, just like that's it. Just me over here throwing wrenches. They're not even like hitting the tractor.
Right, but you just throw. But sometimes, but every so often, you actually catch the wheel in a way that you can slightly deflate the tire, and then there's a little bit of an opening.
I mean, with the 10 Commandments thing, like it's obviously our main topic, but as you're saying, with a law like that is just, and this was also true in many points with the abortion cases as well, where it's just this is unconstitutional under whatever the common meaning of that is now. Then you can't let that stand. The 10 Commandments is a better example because it was out of the blue. It's a new front for lawmakers to be doing this kind of crap. So, I mean, if we are too scared that maybe the Supreme Court's maybe the Fifth Circuit, or maybe the Supreme Court, or maybe blah, 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 then we are fucked if that's the way that we're approaching things, because then our lawless lawmakers will just do whatever. I mean, the only thing that ever half constrains them. Yeah.
I mean, we're fighting, but we're fighting at keyboards, right? And so it doesn't look like the same kind of fight, but it's still that fight.
But my point is, I mean, they know we're scared. They know that they have a favorable forum.
Absolutely. That's why
we know what they're doing. Exactly. We know what they're doing. They know we have to be worried that they might be right, that this is a good strategy, whether it's now or, 10 years from now, whatever. But if we buy into that, then we're screwed, because if you give people an inch, if you give lawless people an inch to a mile,
that's what it is. And so you've got to work to stop it, but you have to. I always try to say, I mean, I say this and people laugh, but I try to look at everything from a very sober lens, right? Meaning I understand that there are always going to be risks, and I'm constantly engaged in a game of calculus, but the decisions we make are the decisions we make. And at this point in our country's history, and we've been here for a long time now, we have to fight for the laws as we know them, the laws that made this country what it is, because there is an attempt to take us back, right? And that's where the history and tradition stuff is really, really scary, because there were a lot of things that were super, super scary that were happening in this country, at the time that the Constitution was signed. And I think we all know why that argument is so scary, because we're harking back to a time, when not all human beings were treated equally.
Yeah. I mean, more than 50% of the population, and we're just talking women. So,
we're just talking women. Right.
Yeah.
So it's all incredibly scary, but the country moved and made progress, and there were many movements backwards and forwards, but we have to fight to defend that progress without question, but knowing, right, that there's a calculus and that there are different things taking place. But when we're talking about the courts, and I think, Michelle, this was a little bit what you and I had talked about before we went on air, is we are in a situation now where we have entrusted 9 people at the Supreme Court of the United States with ultimately making the most critical decisions in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a problem with that. And I think everybody who put us in this situation, and I think it's people on both sides of the aisle, and one side was winning before the other side was, well, we're not really going to put all our eggs in the basket of Congress or our state and local legislatures. We're just going to rely on the courts. And that has created a huge problem for us. We have a country that sits and has a legislative aspect to it, a judicial aspect to it, and an executive aspect to it. And when any one of those three starts to infringe upon the other, and we're seeing that in many ways now with the executive, we have a problem. But to be fair, for those of us who were doing works in the courts for a long time, the view was that the judiciary might be able to assist in ways that the other branches of the government weren't. Right. And now is the time for us to face our comeuppance and to try to rebalance what we need to have happen, because now you have a fight ultimately, and less of a fight at the Supreme Court, between the executive and the judiciary. But we can't be involved in those fights. There are territories and terrains that everyone needs to operate within. And who gets into office, and we understand there's redistricting and laws, and I know all that stuff matters just as much. But this is really a call out to the American people that we have a say in how this democracy works, and we can't entrust it to the lawyers who are arguing cases in front of judges alone. We can't entrust it to our legislatures alone. We can't entrust it to the president alone. We have to be involved every step of the way, or our democracy is going to crumble, and we will have ourselves personally to also blame for that.
Yeah.
So last thing I want to say on this, though, Michelle and I feel that the like, how do national organizations decide what cases to litigate, which is a very important calculation, because again, as Michelle started the question, things that happen in the Fifth Circuit, could have implications other places, or at least in other states in our circuit. But I will say that it's incredibly frustrating living in a place like this, where there are times when the analysis is that people here are just going to have to live under an unconstitutional regime, because we ain't going to challenge it. Maybe we would win, maybe we wouldn't, maybe it'd be good, maybe it would be bad, but we're not going to fight it. So we're going to just sort of be like, you guys are living under an unconstitutional regime. So that's just my
Well, my view is I'm going to go back to a book that Charles Blow wrote, which is, we need more people coming to the South, right? We had a whole group of people who left for very good reasons, during the civil rights movement and after. They went up north for very good reasons, but we need those folks to come back down south, because the truth is, we can win what is happening here right now, but we're a divided country mainly because we live in oases of people who are exactly like us. And we need to integrate more as a country, and we need to come and do the work in places where it's real hard to do the work. And Ellie and Michelle and I'm a transplant, right? I came here from New York, right, where everybody can have these woo, we love rights and liberties, and everyone at the bar loves rights and liberties too. That's different when you come down south, but it's important because there are like-minded people who often feel silenced, and Ellie, to your point, who want to feel as though they still have rights, even though they live elsewhere. But we can start to ensure that the country is the mosaic of people that it is by making sure we ourselves integrate more. But that's hard because, civil rights attorneys, they want to go to California. They want to go to New York. They don't want to come here.
That's right. But I welcome more people to come to the South. And mostly I welcome more resources to come to the South.
There you go.
Because people need to remember. And like Black women who mostly remember this, and we'll say this all the time, but like I want to echo it straight up that change comes from the South in our country. That's where it comes from. It's slow and it is fucking hard fought, but like that's where it comes from. And that's where it's going to come from again. Like this time around with reproductive rights, it's going to come from the South. It's where the things are the worst now.
Yeah.
And it's where there still are people who are absolutely fighting for this. We're going to be the ones who, and I say I think I'll be dead actually, but I'll do what I can in my lifetime, But the writing the South off, there's a lot to that. Some of it was what I was just talking about with you, but then some of it is also stuff that I don't even know if we've talked about this on the podcast, just like people giving up on the South. And I'm like, no, I mean, things are bad here. So you shouldn't give up on where things are the worst. Like that's fucking bullshit. As just like solidarity. And then second, the South knows how to do this. It just takes time, but we will fight. So anyway, that's a different soapbox, but
yeah. Well, I mean, I'll just say the ACLU is one of the few organizations that has been here and doing and fighting. And it's hard because
100%.
Civil liberties are constantly under attack here, whether it's immigration, whether it's criminal justice, whether it's wrongful convictions, reproductive rights, religious freedoms. It's a lot for y'all to take on. And I'll just tell you, when I was growing up, on our refrigerator was the ACLU phone number because it's before there were websites. So it was literally a magnet with the ACLU's phone number that my mom was calling all the time because she's like, they're trying to get my kid to pray in school. Like, So I am very grateful to have the ACLU here.
No doubt. And circling back to the joke at the beginning about y'all being jack of all trades, I'm so thankful that there is an organization like that. I mean, it's good that, there's lots of people are doing sort of specific things, but like we are in a position now, and obviously we were in Trump 1 too, but now it's just supercharged where they're doing it all at the same time. And I know you guys partner with lots of organizations that have specific expertise, whatever, but like I sleep better at night knowing that like the ACLU has like expertise in like at least most, if not all, of like the fucking unconstitutional authoritarian bullshit that the administration is pulling.
No, and I think there is something about the setup that we have national projects with enormous expertise in all of the various ways that we're under attack that is beyond helpful because it allows us to go in and be the generalist, right? So my team, we get to be the generalists, but we have the experts that help us really move forward on all the various fronts. One just never thinks that you're going to be moving on those fronts all at the same time.
Right.
And that's where, the point is the change does come from the South, but it comes from when you really oppress people so much that they have nothing left to lose except fight and come forward and say, enough is enough. And we have a view about what this country is and how far we've come and the rights that we have. And no, we're not going to have you take it away. And we're going to support the organizations that will do the work alongside us. And so to your point, Ellie, it's about resources. It's about focusing on the South. And it's about knowing that the work has to be done where it's hardest to do it. And I think what we're seeing around, and I'll even say, from our national office's view that, the focus is now on the South. Before the composition of the courts changed, I think there was still a view that we're going to try to move in circuits where we can really start to make some good law. And then hopefully that will have a trickle down effect. But we now have a composition that's a lot of the opposite. So now we're moving from the ground up. But
which, of course, what we as citizens have allowed in terms of the judiciary, not just that we like rely on them, but in terms of judicial appointments and what happened under Trump 1, it's a fucking travesty. And the fact that it has been so hard to get the left on board with understanding that it matters who's on not just the court, but like the courts. And it's that just makes me want to like throw up. Like, honestly, like just how like effective, I mean, really how effective they were, Mitch McConnell and Trump and, all of those, all those fucking assholes of the Heritage Foundation with like, just with stacking the courts up and down with people who are our age, who will be on the court for these courts for many, many, many years, who were ideological in a way that we'd never seen before. Like, honestly.
Yeah. Ellie, do you have any final questions for Nora?
No, the only thing, what we've been talking about specifically with this case about conservative lawmakers or attorney generals trying to overturn precedent, and how I just keep seeing that as just a real concerted effort. And I don't mean just like with marriage equality. I mean, not,
it's happening in redistricting. It's happening with Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. I mean, this is something we're seeing on all fronts. We're trying to rewrite the nation's history, right? That's ultimately what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and I mean,
we're trying to fight it.
They're like, let's fucking give it a shot with whatever the laws are that like the court has ruled on that we don't like. Let's give it a shot. And plus, of course, really, I think just trying to absolutely undo the Warren Court, just like everything that the Warren Court did just to try to undo it. So anyway, that's not a question.
I mean, I think what it comes down to is people actually have to know the positions of the individuals that they're electing and the kind of power that they have. Because my view generally is that people are good. They're everyday people. They want to make friends with people in the supermarket. They don't necessarily associate who they like or don't like along political lines. If they meet another mom in the park with their kids, they're going to have that conversation. But when people are out at the polls voting or not voting, they're not necessarily thinking through, what is this person going to do to uphold the laws as I know it? Mm-hmm. Or what are they going to do to change the country as I know it? And will the changes they make be what I think is most important, right? Will that make sure that I can feed my child, that I have, gainful employment, that I have appropriate protections at work, that I have appropriate housing protections, that I have appropriate consumer protections? Or is this going to be somebody who's actually going to try to put me or my family member behind bars? Is this be somebody who's going to try to kill my child? Is this somebody that's going to try to kill, my best friend's child? I don't think people really realize when they're going to the ballot box just how much power they have. But we all have a role in this country. And I think many people have felt for a long time that it didn't matter who they voted for, or it didn't matter who was in office. Everyone's corrupt. Everyone's going to do something wrong. But I think what people are starting to see now is that's actually not true. Somebody in power can do a lot to change your local school. They can do a lot to change the country. They can start arresting your friends and your neighbors and maybe even you. And so I hope that as we continue to talk about the courts, because I'm also the big nerdy lawyer here, but I am dubious, right, that we're going to litigate our way to success here. What we need is a movement of people who are appalled by what is happening in this country to come forward and to actually start ensuring that they're going to go to the ballot box, they're going to get people out there, and they're going to hold their elected officials to account. That is not necessarily what I'm seeing, but when people try, and I've seen it working in the immigration spaces, when people go to their elected Republican representatives and we know that this happened locally with a woman who was arrested by ICE here, that you can get your elected representative to do the right thing. If we can get elected Republican representatives to engage in the mass detention and deportation campaign and save someone's mother and child and brother and sister, we can get them to do what we need them to do when they're at the legislature. It's just that so much of that is unknown to the people who put them in office. And I'm sure a lot of people who are up in arms about the 10 Commandments, they voted for the very people who made that happen, even if it's by virtue of silence, even if it's just by virtue that they agreed to have that put in. And that's where I think people aren't as plugged in locally as we all need to be. That's why I do believe that the fate of our democracy and our country, it is in our own hands. And I say that knowing how complicated redistricting is. And I say that knowing how complicated it is to even ensure that the representative of your choice gets elected. But your representative, if you're a constituent and you have a say, you can get them to make decisions that are going to change your local community. But you have to believe and you have to put in the energy and effort and understand that the courts aren't going to save us.
Well, who gets elected is, the original virtue or the original sin with all of this. Because first of all, a lot of our judges get elected. So
there you go.
In our state and many other states, the ones who don't get elected get appointed, whether that's on the federal level or the state level. So either you have a say in electing the person directly, and people also are very disengaged with judicial elections, or you have a say in electing the people who pick the people. So the power flows from the people, or so they tell us, right? That's how it's supposed to be. So there's no doubt that it goes back to that. But the lack of civic engagement is really, So no,
well,
I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah. And I know, Michelle, this is, preaching to all of our choirs, but no, I like the rousing speech, Nora.
I like it too. All right.
Well, I gotta have hope, or I'm gonna cry all the time.
I know.
Listen, Michelle and I are both we tease like plenty, at least to each other. We're eternal optimists. I mean, that's and again, that goes back to the South and keeping fighting, believing in the country, believing in the fight. I mean, it's even when it's, against all odds, it goes against my whole personality to do it another way, but yeah, I mean, they are making it hard for us to stay optimistic, but can't beat me down. Can't beat any y'all down. Yeah.
Right.
But Ellie's tired.
I am tired. That's right. You can exhaust me, but I am very tough and stubborn still.
She's going to be laying on the side of the road, just lobbing
the wrenches. Yes.
There you go. That's what I say when people don't understand my job. I basically say I have a toolkit and it's full of wrenches and I throw them.
I like it.
That's my job.
Nora, where can people follow your work and the work that the ACLU is doing?
Oh, great. So this is the Luddite version of me. I'm not good at that stuff. Okay. I'm sure we have a website. It's probably, I feel like I need to look that up.
I'll put it in the show notes. I'll look it up for you. Don't worry.
I think it's www.laaclu.org, just largely because
I think that's right.
Our email address.
Yeah. Well, Nora, we really appreciate you doing this. Thank you so much. And we will have you back. We want to do a deep dive into what's going on with immigration and your work in that space too.
Yeah, luckily there's endless things to talk about.
There you go. There you go. Because here we are in Louisiana in the Deep South. Jack of all trades, right? So yes, happy. Thank you both so much for having us and for having me.
Yeah, no, thanks so much. It's been great, Nora.
Okay, we'll be in touch. Bye.
Bye. And for listeners, I guess we should do what is our sign off, Michelle, always? What people need to do?
What do the people need to do, Ellie?
The people need to rate, review, and subscribe. And also send us your seriously moments. By some means that I don't know how to do, but I think it's called a voice memo. Yeah.
Yep.
And we'll see you guys next week.
All right. See you next week.
Bye, everybody.
Seriously is presented by Lift Louisiana, a nonprofit organization advocating for reproductive health rights and justice.